Okay, the beginning of Whitefriars was actually around about 1832-34. I always get the two dates mixed up, I'm afraid. And it was when James Powell bought the company for his sons to occupy them, basically. At the time, of course, they were making, the company was making Georgian style and then later Victorian style glass. And obviously, there's a huge difference between that and where we ended up in the world of pop art. Right, the first influence that really begins to show in the work of Powell was really the Venetian influence. There was an exhibition in London of a private collection of Venetian glass, and it was highly influential on the public, let alone designers. And Harry Powell picked up on this and began to produce wares that had a Venetian lilt to them. The one on the left is what they called white Venetian, and it predates straw opal and blue opal glass, which he later managed to experiment with and produce. It's actually very much influenced by Salviati, this particular piece on the left. You then get the influence of the sort of applied wings, for want of a better word, and things like that onto what essentially is an arts and crafts form. In around about 1860, William Morris commissioned the Red House and Philip Webb to do the designs for Webb House, for Red House. And Philip Webb also did the glassware for Red House. The pieces on the left are examples of those wares, and indeed the one in the photograph on the extreme right, they bought, not from me, but from another dealer some years ago, a whole group of these tumblers. I was actually given this one because it has a break in the trailing, and he'd made a reasonable amount of money on his sale, so he was very kind and gave me that one. The claret glass in the middle comes with either clear jewel fronts, red or ruby, or green. And the one on the left with the quatrefoil stem and the dome foot appears to be from the same period, but the jury's out at the moment because of the colour, which may well be later. After Powell had received the commissions for the work by Philip Webb, they commissioned T.G. Jackson to produce glassware and paid him a small commission, very small against the amount that they produced. And these are the initial pieces. The green on the left, which has the decanter, is probably one of the two colours that would have been introduced initially, the other being clear, on the basis that they were going to be used in the hotel, the Midland Grand Hotel at St Pancras. And the later ones, which are highly prized by collectors, the straw opal and the blue opal, these being blue in the picture on the right, those would have come in around about 1877-79. Powell also produced metal framed wares, which really goes towards the arts and crafts. And it's only in recent times that decorative arts collectors who particularly like arts and crafts have begun to get into the collecting of these type of pieces as opposed to the just straightforward glass items. Under here, where the pieces of metal meet the surface, there's a little piece of brass set in. Brass being softer than steel, and consequently, or iron, and consequently didn't scratch in the same way if it was left on a piece of furniture. They also produced lamps, and this is the largest that they produced. It was known as the Eiffel for obvious reasons. And it's strange, really, because you've only got a tiny piece of glass, in a sense, in proportion to the rest of it. But it's probably, in a way, not necessarily their reply to W.A.S. Benson, but also Harry Powell did work with W.A.S. Benson, and consequently he designed both wrought iron pieces and copper and brass pieces. W.A.S. Benson commissioned Powell to make their shades. Now, the problem we have nowadays is, of course, that it could be, usually it will be a straw opal shade. So yellow Vaseline would be maybe a way that a lot of people in this country would describe it. In America, Vaseline is a different term, really. But nowadays, of course, there will have been lots of marriages, and you often see things, pieces of Benson that have had a new, as it were, lampshade added, and you know full well that at least one of them is Walsh, because it has a iridized surface and it's a matted surface at the same time, and the only people that I'm aware of that produced that were Walsh, so certainly not Powell. And we carry on with other people commissioning and working with Powell, and Gertrude Jekyll was another one. We all know her for her arts and crafts gardens and her work with Lutchins. Not many people realise that she designed glassware. It was actually sold by James Green and Nephew, and this was in around about 1874 from memory. And the two pieces in the photograph were actually lent by me to a exhibition on Gertrude Jekyll that was held at the Lightbox in Woking about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe longer. We all know how time flies. They very rarely turn up in straw opal, but that little straw opal one is around about 6 inches high. So the tall one must be about 14 inches, which translates to around about 350 millimeters. Harry Powell show his work, or the work of the company, at the arts and crafts exhibitions that were held around the turn of the century. And the pieces on the photograph on the left, certainly the two tall ones, both were seen in photographs that around about 1910-11. The piece in the middle is obviously from this period, and yet it's a shape that is renowned to have been designed by Joseph Francis in the 1920s, which has left me with a conundrum ever since I've owned it. There's no real answer to it at this stage, and certainly the archives don't give us any information, sadly. Also used for everyday use in an inkwell with a lovely silver stopper marked JP&S, and if you look very carefully you can see that that outline is the outline of a kiln. Right, Harry Powell used to travel not only in this country but also abroad, and the vases in the top photograph are examples of drawings that he made in museums or from items that were possibly ceramic, not necessarily glass. They could even have been metal. The piece on the extreme left with the teardrops is known as a Hugo van der Goes vase because it appears in a Hugo van der Goes picture, and Harry Powell just drew from that picture, and that was another source he used to draw from, old masters. And you can see that you cannot mistake these pieces for arts, anything other than arts and crafts. And the other thing that's good to know is that these teardrops on these vases, they're more like long dashes with an engorged end, rather than a huge blob with a tail that gradually depletes. The huge blob in the tail, generally speaking, rule of thumb, is not Powell. Right, we now have these a group of glasses here which relate both to Harry Powell, which are these pieces, and obviously Jackson here, and the clear dual-fronted Philip Webb piece. This piece here, the straw opal piece, is recorded in a drawing in a book by Mrs. Lofty called The Dining Room, and it's a wonderful little piece of reference because most people have over the years ignored it, and you can see these little line drawings, and I think this one is turned on its side, so you have to be very observant and make sure your eye remembers when you're out and about. Here we've got a hollow twisted stem, which is quite a favourite of Harry Powell's design techniques. Always, well, invariably with a Maurice on it. Sorry about that. Right, yet another link with other designers, Edward Spencer. This is on the left a page out of the studio yearbook for 1912 or 13. I didn't have time to check, unfortunately, but there's the vase that we see here on the right. Powell's worked with other guilds as well, including the one run by Ashby, which is known as the Guild, I'm sorry, here we are, the Guild of Handicraft. There we go. And it's these links which make Powell important. It's something that no other company had. They didn't in Stourbridge have the same links, and it's possibly, in my view, partly because not only Harry Powell was adventurous, because he experimented with colour and until he got what he wanted to achieve. He obviously also experimented with design for that period, and he was linked with a lot of other designers through the Art Workers Guild, where he was at one time the master. Right. Now, Powell did stained glass windows, and because it's such a vast area, I've just included it at this point in the talk because you could have a whole talk, probably 2 or 3, just on the stained glass. There are links with the Pre-Raphaelites, William Morris, as well as the work they did in-house, right through into the 50s, if I remember rightly. In fact, no, the 60s, because they made block glass, which was held in concrete and cement, which you may well see when you pass modern churches these days. You can see here that in this corner here, there is a little Whitefriar, which is a giveaway that it's a Powell window. And although a lot of you would probably know that, there are a few people who probably wouldn't, so it's worth knowing. The influence of the stained glass was to produce these streaky pieces, which oftentimes were just one colour, but the prize pieces come in 4 colours and with lots of swirling and interlinking of the colour. And they're just wonderful pieces. They were produced between 1928 and 1939. Now this is on top of one of my kitchen cabinets. It's the cloudy range, and this is, if you like, the second inception in a way of the pieces that had the mica in and the streaks of white. The colouring is basically a colour over the top of white, but as you can see, it depends on who's on the chair at the time, how the colour was laid in, the white in particular, and how you get different effects. You've got similar effects here and here, but it's totally different on the tumbler vase, and again different on this big lamp base. There was a later version of it in around about 1950 to 55. We only know about it because a lady lent some pieces to an exhibition that was held in Leicester, and her mother had been working at Whitefriars, and during the lunch break, one of the men there, who was a bit sweet on her, made her a little ashtray and also a couple of small vases, and they turned up at this exhibition. For many years, we didn't know. Everybody kept thinking they could be Whitefriars. There was no proof at all. However, this prima facie gave us the proof. Unfortunately, when somebody's about 93, which the mother was, you really sort of, at that point, take her word for it. It's much better if you can have three people with cross-referencing, but it works. You can see the technique, you can see the way the colours are finished on these 1950s pieces are definitely, they have a Powell technique to them. Now, Frank Branquin, I found this on the internet, and I would love to find one of these glasses just because I think they look so wonderful. But there's no proof that he ever had any of them produced, but they were drawings for James Powell and Sons. And it just emphasizes this link with other designers. Again, Gordon Russell. Now, this was his second throw at the dice of designing glass. His first was the series of Ligon glasses, or Ligon, which were made by Stevens and Williams, based on ale glasses from the 17th century. They came in writhen, plain, and ribbed. And at the moment, I think you could all walk past a clear, plain one without batting an eyelid. The writhen ones have a certain 20th centuryness about them. However, they are what they are, and they have a look of being a reproduction, whereas this vase on the right doesn't. He uses the technique that was introduced in around about 1904 of shallow cut. These are based on Roman glasses, if I remember correctly, and it's shallow cutting, and the whole point was that the cutting didn't ruin the outline of the glasses or the vessels that it was used on. And you can see that he's used exactly that technique along the bottom here to intimate the soil or the earth underneath the flowers. Now, this vase was designed in 1927, and to my mind, it is the beginning of the modern cut glass movement in this country. That particular vase, there is a series of wares by him, some of which have a real Georgian look. And indeed, in his memoir, he talks about going into an antique shop and being offered a piece of glass that he designed as being Georgian. Now, Powell continued with their own cut glass wares, which have a real Art Deco feel about them. These pieces on this side are from a private collection, to be fair, owned by a dealer, but so far he's never wanted to part with them, and he obviously enjoys them, which I'm very pleased about. They are by a mixture of designers: Barnaby Powell, W.J. Wilson, and also James Hogan, and the cutter was Albert Tubby. And you can see here, I found this one and there was no apparent record of it, but we found the record in the archives at Museum of London, 1934 again. Now these two, this one, the line drawing proves the Whitefriars connection, and it's by James Hogan, and there are a series of these wares which use dichroic glass, and all of them are by James Hogan. And Patrick Hogan, who sadly passed away around about 18 months or so ago, he collected these pieces, and I'm indebted to him for both these photographs. Now, there was a guy called Captain Dunn Cook who worked for Elferson in Sweden, and he worked also with Powell. The piece on the left, the pink one, it's a very unusual colour. Usually they're greens and ambers. They all have a crude signature. It looks like it's been put on by a child who really can't quite read properly, and it's not in line. And you just think somebody's added this, but no. These pieces have 5 lobes, which helps give away the designer, and the marks underneath also really do give away the designer. Now, it's believed and not been proved that he was highly influential, Dunn Cook was highly influential on producing the Wealdstone range by Powell, which was named after the new site in Harrow and Weald. And they were produced between 1931 and 34. And this piece is one that I found some years ago and that went to a very keen collector who prizes it quite highly, because you very rarely see the streaky versions. It's horizontally ribbed and quite thick walled, which links with the pink piece, and it's the beginning of this Swedish influence on the work of Powell and later Whitefriars. I tend to think of, I know it's James Powell and Sons bracket Whitefriars, and then Limited afterwards at the point where they added that. I tend to think of Powell up until the Second World War and Whitefriars after the Second World War. For me, it delineates it comfortably. Right, the decanters on the left are, M54 is the name that you should have on it, but it's also known as Cavette decanter. And it's based on a Venetian design and piece, which had more ripple to the body. It was much lighter weight and often had gold inclusions in the body as well as the stopper. But they have a very modern look about them, and they were produced from around about 1930 through to the late 40s. And to my mind, they really sort of shriek deco. This piece is a piece of James Hogan with the trailing that has little broken bubbled pieces which are meant to be in it. They come in different colours, blue background, amethyst trailing, etc. And they are part of the general idea of having trailing on glass that was introduced or reintroduced by Barnaby Powell. I haven't got any of my own photographs, so I managed to find this online today. And it illustrates the influence of Dunn Cook on William Wilson and on the production of the company. Again, lobed pieces, but there are 4 lobes on these pieces, not 5. And they're very heavy. They go in and out of favour by collectors these days, but after all, they were used as flower vases. That's what they were meant for, and they are extremely good for that as a design. 1940 through to 48, and he also designed this decanter, which is often known as a skittle decanter nowadays, but it's a given name by collectors. Does have a sort of skittle look about it, to be fair. Right, Geoffrey Baxter joined the company in 1957, and he was at the Royal College, and it was Wilson who found him and effectively offered him a job. He produced these simple designs which heavily resonate as being Scandinavian, and the red pieces, the ruby pieces, they were produced later, 64 instead of the period of 61 to 3. And they, to my mind, hark back to the arts and crafts where they have a drawn stem. And again, I think they're very elegant. This piece, although you can't see it very easily, if you look very carefully, there's a white line, enamel line of trailing on the edge of the rim. And they were only made for about a year in 1964, and they stopped making them because in the Lear, the white tended to ping off. Now that would be okay if it wasn't for the fact that it was pinging off and hitting the one next door. So they had a lot of wastage, which meant that they stopped making them. Further Scandinavian influence. This piece is known as Evening Sky, around about 1957, soon after Baxter joined the company. And it's actually two-tone color, and when you see it in daylight, it's very difficult to assess as what color it really is, whether it's pink or blue. It's not apparently dichroic, it's more like a Submerso piece. And this was around about 1958 and was designed by two gentlemen for Atlas Lighting, and they commissioned Whitefriars to make the glassware. This is pink, which is a scarce colorway. It often came with, it's very heavy, and it has a sort of caliper which is pinched down on a rim up here by sliding the sleeve back down over the calipers. It seems very precarious, but it works extraordinarily well. Very simple design. Now, the lights often came in sets of 3, not just a singular pendant light like that, and they would be at different levels to each other, sometimes all the same color, blue, red, amber being the commoner colors, and usually with bubbling, regular form bubbling. These are, again, it's all very Scandinavian influence, but however, this has a nice organic feel about it. And I particularly have a fondness for that range, which is known as the Scandinavian range. Now, of course, we finally get to the bit of Whitefriars that pretty well everybody knows about nowadays, and it's what I feel is the pop art part of Whitefriars production, because of the vibrant colours that they produced, particularly the tangerine and the banjo vase. This one, it's 13 inches tall, so what's that? 330 mil. Ah, damn. I can't go backwards, I don't think. I think when I press it again, it'll go forwards. I'm sorry about that. The blue vase, the Kingfisher blue vase, is actually known as a TV vase purely because of its shape, and it's a modern name given by collectors. It's often mistaken as being a banjo vase and has a banjo vase price put on it, both by dealers who don't know any better, possibly private sellers who don't know any better, and indeed auctioneers, which always surprises me. Now, Peter Wheeler joined the company in 1967, and this is a piece of his work. Damn, I'm sorry, I'm going to go right through again and see if I can get it back. There we go. From current slide there. He produced that piece at the Royal College, and there were several other pieces, and Geoffrey Baxter saw this work and he offered him a job. He produced the studio range in 1969, this being the orange. It's actually got a white liner which allows the amber to become orange. There is also a fawn or beige colour one, which has a more brown look to the bubble and trail, and a sort of light coffee colour in between. And this one is often mistaken as Medina, but it isn't. And if you look carefully, the way that the colours laid in and the colours themselves, they're not quite Medina colours. This is more of an amber here and not a sandy colour, which is enforced by the white that's been included in it. Nothing is known about what happened to Peter Wheeler, other than that when he's contacted, he doesn't want to know anything about glass. These were the pieces that he produced. There's a range of about 20 different shapes of each different colorway. And that was it. But they were highly successful and very prized today. Towards the end of their work, those seem to be, we've gone past the highlight effectively. Powell went into cut glass, probably from the early 70s onwards, and through to 1980 when it was closed. And it feels as though they were struggling at the time and producing things that were sort of okay, but nothing really design classics. There were no design classics at that point. And although this is a dented vase, which sort of harks back to the work of the arts and crafts, where there were dented pieces particularly for a few of the tableware sets, the saving grace for that particular piece appears to be its colour, because it was only produced for a year, and so collectors love it. It's called sky blue, which is very confusing because there was a sky blue which was more of a turquoise colour. In fact, like this background here, which was produced during the arts and crafts era. Now, that's effectively the end of what I feel I need to talk about. I will have missed out some things which I'm sure people will say, well, now, why did he miss that out? I mean, you just can't include everything in a quick run through of how the company developed and why. And something I haven't mentioned, of course, is that it's just got into my head that they were the company that were known as doing self-coloured glass, and they were proud of it. It was something that they were known for, whereas the established companies weren't. And it was, if you like, their USB. Now, I've finished, and on your way out, ladies and gentlemen, please don't forget to stop by the foyer stand where we're selling T-shirts. Thank you very much.
Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The very early stuff, the actual history of the place is amazing.
Yes, it is, and it's that puts them so far ahead of everybody else. And their links to all these other designers, and I suppose you could call it networking.
Yeah.
They must have benefited from being in London as well, Nigel.
Oh yes, obviously. I mean, we always think of ourselves driving up to Stourbridge and that area. I mean, it wouldn't have been like that, would it? It would have been horse and cart or railway.
Yeah.
Peter Dreiser, who taught me, lived in Kenton, which was very close to the Whitefriars Glass factory, and they would blow special things for him for engraving, especially when there were sort of royal presents to be engraved that would then go off round the.
They did a lot of glass blowing for engravers. And to their designs. I mean, Whistler being another one.
Yes.
That obviously comes to mind. I'm
I have a Whistler one.
Had?
Oh, I have.
Oh.
Yes. Simon Whistler's widow sold a lot of the blanks off when he died.
Yeah.
And those early, slightly less easy to work Whitefriars ones were passed on.
Well, that makes sense. I would imagine it's the sort of thing that you buy and then regret and put off working upon if it's not easy.
What are you trying to say?
No, I don't mean it as derogatory. I'm thinking, for sake of argument, I've worked on furniture in the past, and when there's a job that's difficult, it's not quite hurled into the corner, because that would make life even worse, wouldn't it? But basically, it goes in the corner, it gets left until you feel that you can attack it again in the nicest possible way.
It's funny you should say that, because it's a glass that I look at and I think I just can't face marking it unless it is something to do with him.
Yes, so I understand that.
Nigel, is there any pieces that you haven't managed to find yet that you'd like to?
Oh, there's loads of them.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, there was a beautiful inkwell out of that mica range at William Wallace about 3 years ago, and I thought, well, that's actually approachable, and it shot past £800, it shot past 1,000, it shot past 2,000,
Oh, no.
and I thought to myself, no, I don't think I'm going to get that. I think it from memory it was 2,400 hammer, and it's around about 35% there as a buyer's premium. So yeah, so another 800 quid on top.
Yeah. So are there more collectors in America or in England?
No, I think there's more collectors in this country. It hasn't really, British glass as a whole hasn't travelled. Monart did for a while. It seems to be going through the doldrums at the moment. And there were a number of American collectors. I remember meeting some of them at the NEC, and they even bought, because they wanted it as what I call a touch piece. In other words, something that will help you recognise in order to either avoid it or make sure you buy it. In this case, it was a piece of Stevens and Williams Caerleon, and it could easily be mistaken, certainly in those days, as a piece of early Monart. So they bought one of those each for their collections, so that they had the information and were able to look at it all the time. And it's looking at things that, living with them, that has taught me. Yes, it's lovely having books. Sometimes it's what we call glass porn, you see. You know, you see pieces you can't afford by people like, I don't know, Catherine Coleman, some bloke who makes little men in a kiln, you know. So, yeah. So I call it glass porn, and so do a number of other people that I know.
Nigel, how many pieces do you have in your glass porn collection?
Well, I have a vast collection of Nazing because I bought a piece of Nazing thinking it was Monart in my very early collecting days, and I've now got something like 480 pieces of that.
Wow.
I've got over 300 pieces of cut glass. I've got maybe 350 pieces of arts and crafts glass. A collection of 200 pieces of, maybe in round figures, of what I consider to be British Art Deco glass.
Good.
And I believe that both the Art Deco and the arts and crafts glass has had a hard time of it and is very underrated.
But you don't live in Buckingham Palace. Where do you keep them all?
Well, sadly, at the moment, by far and away the majority are in crates, because I'm supposed to be moving. But it was going to be to a large place with plenty of storage. But we all know what's happened to house prices. And sadly, my flat has gone the other way. So I'm not quite sure what's going to happen at this point, other than maybe I buy a small place and double the size of it, rather like they did at the Wallace collection.
Could I ask a question, Nigel? Do you know when they started dipping cut glass at Whitefriars?
To be honest, I don't. You mean to polish it, Catherine?
Yes, that's what I mean, yes.
Yeah, no, I don't know, but most of even the stuff in the 70s, the Baxter pieces, or rather, the pieces by Baxter that are more like the Art Deco sort of restrained style, as opposed to the traditional stuff that he designed for them. Those seem to vary. There can be a sharpish edge, but there can also be an edge which has a, it's not rounded, but it's just not got that sharpness. So I'm guessing certainly in the 70s they were dipping.
Nigel, thank you for a fascinating and erudite talk. The history of Whitefriars Glass, its many artistic designers, and its wonderfully varied products over the years, and they're quite astonishing, really. During our imprisonment, we've expanded our knowledge of glass art, artistry, glass making, and the glass industrial production enormously, thanks to Paul's amazing perseverance and powers of perseverance and persuasion. I mean, it's amazing what he's achieved. We've had a huge range of lectures. Your talk this evening has really added to that pantheon of new knowledge about everything to do with glass that we have been blessed with, as I say, during our imprisonment, which we hope is shortly to end. Thank you so much, both on behalf of the glass sellers and all our friends who've joined us this evening, for a fascinating evening, really mind-blowing, delightful, amazing illustrations too. Just wonderful. I wish you all success in finding a place as big as Buckingham Palace to.
Bless you, sir. Thank you very much.
And thank you to all of you for participating in this evening and all your questions and things and showing such interest. It's one of the bigger attendances we've had on our Thursdays. Great stuff. Thank you all very much. Let us raise our hands and give a clap to Nigel for a fascinating evening.
Thank you very much. That's very kind.
Nigel, thank you so much. It's been very, very enlightening. I'm not going to try and cap the lovely words the master has given, only to mention to everybody that we have a similar excursion next week, which will be June the 10th at 7 o'clock. I will send the details out over the weekend, but the presentation will be done by David Williams Thomas, and he's going to be talking about glass making from the Huguenot refugees to globalization. David Williams Thomas, some of you may already know, was part of a dynasty of glass makers spanning over 180 years. This is the first time that he's actually put a presentation together, and I'm sure he would much appreciate all of your support. He has gone through quite a learning curve in putting this all together and has done a PowerPoint presentation for us all to look at what it's all about. So I say I'll send the details out over the weekend. Please do share them with your friends that are interested in glass, because I think this will be a very, very interesting story. And on that note, I would wish you all a very pleasant evening. Enjoy your weekend, and please don't get sunburned, but please make good usage of this wonderful summer that we're having. We hope it's not short-lived.
Thanks, Paul.
And don't forget to buy your t-shirts.
Yeah. Thanks, Nigel.
Thank you.